I was really excited to read this book. The Secret History is routinely cited as one of the foundational texts of what we call dark academia, and I realized that many people love this book. They rate it 5 stars, they call it the best book they've ever read, they say that it's nothing else like they've read before, and it currently has a Goodreads rating of 4 stars or above by around 80% of its readers. And yet, this reputation is wildly out of proportion to what the novel actually delivers. For a book so closely associated with moral corruption and obsession and the intoxicating pull of the picturesque, The Secret History is strangely bad at portraying all three. The corruption never deepens, the obsession never becomes psychologically convincing, and the aesthetic, supposedly so central, remains oddly hollow. What we're given instead is not a descent into darkness, but something closer to a college soap opera. Petty jealousies, shallow loyalties, melodramatic secrecy, and characters who talk about transcendence but behave like bored undergraduates with too much money. If you approach The Secret History like I did, expecting something more, wanting mystery, something that delves into the psyche of what drives someone to sin, you will be undoubtedly disappointed. There is no profound insight into morality here, not even any insight into history, just a group of wealthy students hoping to get away with a crime. This is a bad book, and here's why. I came to The Secret History with very high expectations. For more than 30 years, Donna Tartt's debut has occupied an almost sacred position in contemporary literary fiction. Since its publication in 1992, it has appeared with remarkable consistency on readers' top 10 novel lists, surrounded by fervent praise, academic reverence, and a devoted fan culture. Admirers have praised its supposed originality, its elegant prose, its academic atmosphere, and the moral seriousness it claims to possess. For many readers, The Secret History represents the best in its genre: dark, intoxicating, and profound. But for a book with such high praise, one that has on its cover phrases like truly deserving of the accolade modern classic, an accomplished psychological thriller, chilling, suspenseful, haunting. I will make an argument for why I disagree with these statements and examine how The Secret History became the defining novel of dark academia. Why, on closer inspection, it doesn't actually understand the darkness it helped to aestheticize, and why I actually think The Secret History is actually a bad book. It's overhyped, it's overlong, overrated, and bad. So let's begin. The Secret History is frequently praised for its atmosphere, yet this praise collapses under even modest scrutiny. What Tartt provides is not atmosphere so much as accumulation. Description substitutes for mood, quantity stands in for texture. Every insignificant detail is recorded with equal seriousness. Now, I'm not suggesting that good character description isn't needed here and there, but Tartt has a horrible habit of killing her own momentum by getting distracted by trivial details. We are always told the brand of cigarettes, the soda someone is drinking, the perfume someone wears. Nothing is too small to escape mention, and nothing is too small to matter. We're even delightfully told the colour of someone's drinking straw. Our feet crunched on the gravel. Charles smoked a cigarette and drank his soda through a red and white striped straw. Black flies whined around our ears. So you and Henry had an argument, I said, just for something to say. This takes place after another seemingly important and significant event in the story, where a member of the group has just been bailed out of jail. And it's like this all through the book. Tartt mistakes verisimilitude for meaning, assuming that enough specificity, the right cigarette, the right drink, will produce emotional depth, that it will make the world and the characters feel real and authentic. What it actually does is kill momentum and drain the reader's interest. There's so much window dressing on every page, in every conversation, it becomes unbearably tedious. Nowhere is this more exhausting than in kitchens and restaurants. Tartt appears incapable of placing characters at a table without listing everything that they ate, or they might eat, or considered eating, or could have ordered under slightly different circumstances. These inventories do not deepen character or sharpen setting, they stall the narrative. It has nothing to do with the plot. The reader simply does not need to know what is inside someone's fridge. I feel like Tartt is always hungry when she's writing this book. Atmosphere is not created by cataloguing menus, it emerges from tension and implication and selectivity, precisely what this novel lacks. True atmosphere requires discipline, knowing what to omit. The Secret History drowns its scenes in irrelevant detail, mistaking saturation for richness. The result is not immersion, but genuine fatigue. There are so many times in this story where it simply does not advance when it should. Tartt also has a terrible habit of gesturing to mystery without delivery. This is constant throughout the book as well. For example, early on we are introduced to the character Julian, the enigmatic classics professor, aloof, unconventional, and mysterious. He accepts only a certain type of student. He insists fervently that they drop all other classes and devote themselves exclusively to his. The setup promises secrecy, danger, intellectual obsession. Why such rigidity? What is this exclusive club, and who are its members? Why such isolation? What is being prepared? The answer, astonishingly, is nothing. Once the students are enrolled, they simply attend class like any other. Julian's strange conditions are barely discussed again. There is no hidden curriculum, no philosophical reckoning. The novel raises questions purely to enjoy the feeling of having raised them. This is the Secret History in miniature. Atmosphere promised, mystery implied, then payoff is absent. The reader is frequently told phrases, things like, Henry had a plan, but what is it? I didn't know. He was always rushing off in secret errands. But then there is never real discovery again. And if it is, the author never has to try very hard to get it. We just have to wait for it. Waiting and waiting. And I didn't even mind that its central revelation arrived some 300 pages in. I did mind, however, that it completely failed to justify the wait. When the book finally discloses the act around which everything supposedly revolves, the effect is not shocking or tragic, but completely flat. Tartt's language is so guilty of meandering and getting caught up in the detail that all tension had already disappeared, and by the time that something in the story was about to be revealed, the revelation was so boringly simple I couldn't quite believe it. Perhaps one of the laziest moments in the novel arrives with the notepaper on the desk, the code found by Richard. The list of details to Argentina. It's very, very convenient. Even more convenient is the phone number written beside it. More convenient still is the woman on the phone who helpfully explains everything, the flights, the timing, the entire plan. The mysterious code is solved almost as quickly as it is mentioned, and the reveal is utterly dull. Sadly, this is the closest the book ever comes to presenting something actually mysterious. In what later in the book feels like an afterthought, Richard considers this as a setup, something for him to discover, but this idea of him being a patsy is never further developed and quickly forgotten. Yet again, Tartt has presented this moment as being thrilling. Where are they? There's this sense of importance and of urgency. Where are they? Does Bunny know? Why are they leaving? But in reality, it amounts to a little more than a group of friends planning a trip. Well, big deal. The drama exists entirely in tone, but not in substance. This is the novel's defining flaw. Tartt gestures toward mystery constantly, but has no interest in constructing one. Instead, she relies on convenience and exposition and a hushed, pretentious voice to simulate importance. And the pacing sadly only worsens after Bunny's death. At what should be a moment of escalating tension, the narrative grinds to a halt. When the group visits the Corcoran family house, after another relentless series of trivial character intros, meaningless conversation exchanges about mistaken names and identities, Henry disappears one night, driving off and provoking more panic. Why? Where has he gone? What does this mean? Surely something significant, something to jolt the plot and propel us forward. But nothing. The incident evaporates without consequence, and instead the reader is subjected to pages of trivial nonsense, hidden drugs, bedroom cabinets, drawn-out exchanges, inclusions that serve no narrative or psychological purpose. 50 plus pages here are devoted to an absurdly long series of tacky soap opera plotlines that appear and then disappear every other 20 pages. The subject matter of these storylines, incest, drunk driving, stealing drugs from someone's grandmother, smoking pot and worrying that someone's mum is going to find out, feels so strainingly lurid and stereotypically teenage, and so irrelevant to the themes of the first half, that it often felt like some moral tract about bad teens doing drugs had been spliced onto the end of a totally different book. The funeral sequence is the worst offender. We wait and wait for it to begin, wading through banal conversations and scenes of everyone getting stoned. When the funeral finally arrives, it is astonishingly uneventful. We are told, rather than shown, that the service or sermon was impersonal and inappropriate. But the reader is not allowed to understand the character's grief, regret, or moral reckoning firsthand. Tartt simply tells us what we should feel because she has not done the work to make us feel it ourselves. Defenders of the secret history might argue that the character's emptiness is intentional, that their moral hollowness is the whole point. But there is a difference between characters who are morally vacant and characters who are simply underwritten. Richard Papin, the person telling the story, is passive to the point of uninteresting, invisible, literally so, by his own account. He describes himself as someone who can remain in the place without being noticed, like a chameleon, he says. This seems to promise narrative purpose, an unseen observer who might overhear something crucial or stumble upon hidden truth, but nothing comes of it. Richard observes, but never discovers. His invisibility leads nowhere because there is no mystery to uncover. Like so many details in the novel, it gestures toward significance and then evaporates. Later in the book, there is a moment where Richard almost becomes interesting, when he considers the possibility that he may have been made the patsy for the crime the whole time. This idea could work. It pulls the reader into new territory, but again, Tartt decides to abandon this idea altogether. It literally just disappears. Henry Winter, one of the more dimensional and interesting characters admittedly, is mistaken for having depth because he is quiet, but his intelligence is asserted rather than demonstrated, his philosophy reduced to vague abstractions. He feels less like a tragic intellect undone by belief than a character burdened with importance. He feels less like a tragic intellect undone by belief than a character burdened with importance the text never earns. We are told that he is mysterious because he is planning things, that he disappears without explanation, but it all comes to nothing as usual. Half the time, it is just because he is having some teenage tantrum. And worse still, one of his character traits is just the fact that among a whole group of very wealthy people, he happens to be even more wealthy. Then there is Julian, the supposed moral catalyst. Introduced as a corrupter of youth, he ultimately does nothing and leaves without consequence. For a character so central to the premise, he exerts almost no ethical gravity. Tartt's poor understanding of characterization again relies on the reader just being told things about the character. At the end of the book, Richard tells us that Julian was silly and vain and remote and even often cruel, that he always knew to say the right thing at the right time. Lazily, Tartt only tells us these traits rather than ever showing them. We are never actually presented with any of this as evidence. Even Bunny, whose death should anchor the tragedy, is never allowed full humanity. He is unpleasant enough to justify his removal, but never complex enough to make that removal tragic. As for the other characters, well, for me, they all sort of just blend into one. Drunk, impulsive, reckless, sulking, hungover, and very dramatic. So when stripped of its ornamentation, the secret history reveals just how little actually happens. The plot, reduced to its essential events, is startlingly thin. An outsider arrives at college, he is accepted into an exclusive Greek class, they accidentally kill a man, they later murder the one member who knows the truth, the story then slowly dissolves into anticlimax. That is the novel. Everything else is pure delay. That's not to argue that the plot is necessarily a bad one. Stripped back, yes, it sounds quite thrilling, and there's lots of room to explore other themes, characters, and emotions. Some of the finest books, and some of my absolute favourites, are built on minimal narrative movement. Indeed, one could argue that this is not merely a legitimate tradition, but one of the richest in literary history. Quiet novels, novels of stasis, memory, and introspection, often achieve their power precisely because they shift attention inward rather than forward. But such novels must compensate. If the story is slight, the prose must be luminous. If events are few, the inner life must be vast. The reader must be invited into deeper, psychological, philosophical, or emotional territory. Consider John Williams's Stoner, a novel in which almost nothing really happens in any conventional sense. Its power lies in its relentless interiority, its precise moral vision, its devastating attentiveness to regret, compromise, and quiet endurance. Or take Virginia Woolf's To the Lighthouse, where the narrative pauses and loops and fractures in order to explore time and perception and the fragile architecture of human thought. The Secret History offers none of this compensation. Its prose, though yes, it's polished, is rarely illuminating. Its characters are not studied so much as observed at a distance. Its narrative voice is curiously uninterested in sustained introspection or philosophical inquiry. Despite its classical references and academic trappings, the novel avoids genuine engagement with the psyche, morality, or the intellectual traditions it gestures towards. In other words, the book borrows the shape of the quiet, contemplative novel without doing its work. It asks for patience without offering depth. When the ornamentation is removed, there is no hidden interior richness waiting underneath, only a sparse sequence of events stretched far beyond their capacity to sustain meaning. Some of the subject matter here is actually really interesting. The idea of people who try to apply an ancient Greek mindset to the modern world, or the question of how a group of initially innocuous people could be led by circumstance to kill one of their friends. But the whole thing is just so under-analysed, so unclear about what its ideas are even, as it desperately wants to be a book about big, profound ideas. References to the difference between ancient and modern mindsets, or to various interpretations of the murder, are occasionally tossed out but never grow roots. They drown in the ocean of pointless plot. An interesting idea will crop up every 50 pages or so, and Tartt will smother it in its cradle and then write 50 more pages of binge drinking and soap opera convolutions. For a novel so apparently obsessed with secrecy and ritual and the weight of history, the revelation of the central act the night the group gets drugged, wanders into the countryside, and kills a farmer feels astonishingly thin. This is the moment toward which everything supposedly builds, the buried truth whose gravity is meant to justify the novel's length, tone, and self-seriousness. And when it finally arrives, it lands with a dull thud. The story of the murder is not dramatized, uncovered, or discovered. It is simply told to us by Henry, second-hand, in a flat recounting that drains the event of immediacy or horror. Where is the sense of unfolding revelation? Where is the psychological excavation or moral reckoning? After hundreds of pages of suggestion and delay, the truth arrives as exposition. What we are given instead are fragments masquerading as depth, bite marks, half-seen figures, a sense that something wild and ancient briefly intruded. None of it is ever explained. None of it is ever developed. These details float on the surface like symbols that refuse to mean anything. They are not clues, they are decorative gestures. Tartt hints at Dionysian chaos, at mythic regression, at the collapse of moral boundaries, but refuses to follow through. The novel gestures towards significance and then moves on, as if the mere mention of these ideas were sufficient. Worst still, the act itself is absurdly simple. After all the cloistered academic mystique, all the whispered conversations and the classical allusions, we discover that the great unspeakable secret amounts to a hike ending in a man being pushed off a cliff. That's it. No intricate moral dilemma, no terrible accent born of hubris, no tragic inevitability, just a basic act of violence padded with pretentious language. The result is a reveal that feels less like a revelation than a cheat. The reader has been trained to expect complexity from the first page. Depth and consequence is lacking, only to be handed a thin anecdote retroactively framed as profound. We are told that this moment is shocking, that it's terrible, that it's world-altering, but the event itself, stripped of its atmospheric framing, is dull, simplistic, and strangely weightless. And for me, this is the novel's defining failure in miniature. The Secret History promises mystery, but delivers trivia. It promises depth, but offers implication. And at the very center of it all, where meaning should crystallize, there is nothing solid to grasp. The secret, it turns out, is not terrible because it is profound, but because it is disappointingly empty. Perhaps another unfair comparison, but in Crime and Punishment, guilt corrodes the psyche long before society intervenes. Another comparison is in The Remains of the Day. A lifetime of repression becomes tragic through quiet, irreversible loss. In The Talented Mr. Ripley, charm is terrifying because it is psychologically precise. While I'm here, I just wanted to point out another book that I recently read. This is So Long, See You Tomorrow by William Maxwell. Now, trust me, this is connected. I recently read this, a novel over 500 pages shorter than The Secret History, yet infinitely richer. In a slim, restrained form, Maxwell captures time, memory, regret, and moral consequence with devastating clarity. Place feels lived in, people feel fragile and real, no meaningless exchanges, no pages and pages of trivial conversation, no false build-ups. It does, however, open in a similar way. There's a dead body. What follows is a masterful depiction of memory, grief, regret, family, and friendship. So trim, but so brilliant. By comparison, this, The Secret History, feels emotionally impoverished. Tartt offers atmosphere where Maxwell offers humanity. The novel's ending deserves special mention because whatever lingering illusion of seriousness The Secret History has carefully cultivated finally collapses into outright melodrama. What should be the narrative's moment of moral reckoning instead devolves into something closer to a badly staged TV drama, frantic, noisy, and fundamentally hollow. We are treated to a wild goose chase, endless and endless pages of Charles being drunk all the time, and his disappearance and reappearance with a gun. Shots are fired, characters are wounded, and then there is a suicide. The book wants the chaos to feel tense and horrifying. Instead, it just feels ridiculous. This is not psychological collapse. This is not a psychological collapse or moral consequence unfolding with tragic weight. It is a spectacle masquerading as depth. Ridiculous. And then, more ridiculous still, comes the epilogue, which may be the novel's most punishing stretch of all. Rather than allowing events to resonate or our storyteller to offer some reflection at all, Tartt insists on a grim inventory of outcomes. Another attempted suicide, a dreary checklist of where everyone ends up, stripped of any emotional insight or thematic purpose. It reads like gossip overheard years later, not the reckoning of lives altered by crime and guilt. We even get an update about a cat. Nothing is discovered, nothing is understood. We are simply told at length again that everyone is miserable. It is not poignant, it is exhausting. The book does not trust silence or ambiguity or restraint, so it fills the space with updates, explanations, and emotional overstatement until nothing is left to feel. What should have been tragic lands as absurd. What should have been unsettling feels overwrought. And what claims to be profound ultimately resembles nothing so much as a collegiate melodrama that mistakes excess for insight and noise for consequence. 550 pages later, we reach the end of the story hearing about a dream Richard had of Henry. But by that time, I had long stopped caring. Tartt had simply run out of things to say, but kept talking anyway. So why do people love this book? Why do they keep rating it 5 stars and saying that it's one of their favorites ever, that it's nothing like they've ever read before? At its best, Tartt gestures towards something the novel might have been. A psychological study, a tragedy, a book on morality and evil choices. But gestures are not achievements. The Secret History repeatedly raises the idea of depth while declining to engage in it. The admiration it receives is therefore not entirely misplaced, but I think it is profoundly inflated. Tartt knows how to sound serious by dropping names like Dante and, this is Dante-esque, or the landscape looked like something from Tolstoy. She knows how to invoke classical learning, slow pacing, and moral darkness in ways that flatter the reader. The book feels intellectual, it feels weighty, it feels like something one ought to admire. But feeling important is not the same as being important. This is a book that, yes, names Dante, Tolstoy, Shakespeare, Dostoevsky, Milton, Chandler, Homer, among many others, but fails to understand what makes them so great. Hopefully you agree with me, and if you do, please let me know in the comments below. Of course, if this is one of your favourite books and you would simply adore it and you love Tartt and think she's a genius, then fight and argue for that decision too. But let me know, and please remember to like and subscribe to this video. Bye bye.